These are the tools you will need to assemble a Kayfun Lite Plus, or any Kayfun for that matter. This build will be between 1.6 and 1.8 ohm. The intended voltage is to be 4.2 volts. From left to right, I have a device, of course, with a 510 connection, that being the ProVary. I have a Phillips head screwdriver, which is actually quite small. It's not a jeweler screwdriver, but it is fairly small. To the right of that, I have a flathead. To the right of that would be the wire cutters and needle nose pliers. The two materials I will be building with will be Eco Wool 2mm hollow and 30 gauge round Kanthal. Let's go over the parts of the Kayfun Lite Plus. The first piece is the deck, and that is the main body of your atomizer. The second piece over here is what I call the positive pedestal. The next piece is the positive pin. This is quite often what does not make connection if something is going wrong with many other atomizers. This one is non-adjustable. The next part is the insulators for the positive pin and the deck. That is the bottom, and that is the top insulator. These go inside of the deck. The next piece is the chimney. It has two pieces, a bottom and a top piece. The next piece is actually three pieces. There's the tank section. There's a top, middle, and bottom. The midsection can be traded out for a stainless steel piece. I seem to have forgotten the top cap, which is the piece that screws into the tank section. Most importantly, there is an O-ring inside of there, which is required for the tank. It seals everything up. Just be aware that it is there. The chimney fits into that O-ring. And last but not least, there is the drip tip or mouthpiece. The Kayfun can accept all 510 connection mouthpieces. I will now start to assemble the deck. I will start with the bottom insulator for the positive pin. It very simply goes into the bottom of the deck, into the threads. It usually snaps in, but sometimes you may need to use the center pin as a guide and then push everything in at once against something a little flat. The other insulator goes up top. It only goes in one way. The tab faces outward from the negative pedestal. The positive pedestal sits on top, and you screw the positive pin into that pedestal. It may take a few tries, but once you get it going, it goes right through. It is very important to screw in that particular positive pin as far in, almost as tight as you possibly can. I typically take a pair of regular pliers and hold the entire pedestal assembly with them fairly tightly. Then I take my flathead and I proceed to tighten everything up. Just a little bit over snug is good. You can over tighten it though. So the real test is to take your Phillips head and to tighten down the screw on the positive pedestal. If it moves, it actually is not tight enough. We are going to wrap a coil in the range of 1.8 or 1.7 ohm. More simply put, it will be 6 wraps around 3 strands of eco-wool. The next step is to take your Kanthal and wrap it just once around the eco-wool. I use the first wrap for stability. I actually take it off after I am done, so I do not count it as an actual wrap. I do that because it comes out more even. So there is wrap 0, and then wrap 1, wrap 2. Be aware it is a very good thing to look at where you're wrapping it. Our goal is to wrap these coils as close as possible together. Okay, there we have 6 wraps, and that should be around 1.7, 1.8 ohm. Take the first wrap off and then pull it finger tight. When I do this, it is very important to keep the coil in your fingers so it does not come unraveled. The final product should look something like this, to where both of the tails or leads are facing opposite directions. Now we will mount the coil onto the entire deck and pedestal assembly. Make sure you undo the screws first, just enough to let the wire through. When I put the coil onto the pedestal assembly, I always start with the negative side first because it is unable to actually twist around like the positive side can. The other reason is that it's much easier to do so since you can pull it fairly tightly. I just take the wire when I'm holding the coil over the air hole with my thumb, pull it around, and tighten it down. Same thing goes for the positive side. Just be careful on this side when you tighten it down to only go a little bit to hold it down, and then place your thumb in front of where you would be turning it clockwise to tighten it down. The real test is to see if when you pull on the wire and tug at it, if it comes undone. If it comes undone, it obviously is not tight enough. This is where we want it. The next step is to ensure the wick and coil assembly is pulled up a sufficient distance from the air hole. If it is not, it can cause the device to flood or leak. Here we will be troubleshooting off the hot spots from the coil. It is highly unlikely, no matter how neat and nice your coil was when you wrapped it on the silica or eco-wool, that it does not have any hot spots. The first thing that I'm going to do is take my variable voltage device and set it at a lower setting. In this case, it was 3.3 volts, and then I proceed to place it onto the device. The next step is to fire the device without any liquid, a dry fire. A few minor taps here and there. You want to push the coils that are lighting up towards the ones that are not. Ideally, you want everything to heat up at the same time. This particular coil had almost no issues, so it only took 1 or 2 taps. The reason that you do not want to have any hot spots is that those hot spots are where the wire is getting hotter than the rest of the coil, and it will burn off liquid at a different rate. Typically, this translates into a flavor that is very, very harsh. Now we will be clipping off the wicks to make them a particular length. The length that you want to look for is just touching, or just barely touching, the bottom of the reservoir on the deck. If you'll notice on the sides there are channels, 2 of them on either side, and you will want to avoid putting any wicks in there or having wicks anywhere near it. Otherwise the device may not feed correctly. The wicks that I clip off first are the 2 tails. Usually at this point they are a little frayed. I clip them just barely clear. I still leave a little bit of wick, but make sure to clip them fairly short. Much shorter than I would the other 2 wicks that I am about to clip. Now, the way that I measure distance for these 2 wicks, and I am not going to leave them as a loop, I gauge the distance by pushing them downward, as if the chimney were on top of it. I would say about 1 centimeter in length from the coil. One thing to be aware of is to use just enough wick. If too much wick is used, then the device can flood. If you use too little wick, then there may be the opposite problem of the coil is starving because there's not enough liquid held within the wick. Next, we will put the chimney on, starting with the bottom portion. Simply slip it over the wick and tighten the chimney down. Make sure you look inside of the chimney now and take a flathead to very gently push any wick that is sticking up or out of the chimney back down in. Also be careful not to push the wick back into any liquid channels on the bottom. This is your last chance for adjustments to the coil before everything is done. Let's put this onto a device, see if it fires with the chimney. The next step is to prime the wicks with liquid. I am going to use some 8 milligram shaded. Make sure they are either very saturated and the color of the liquid or clear. Just make sure to drop a sizable amount of liquid directly onto the wicks. Give it a test fire and put the top of the chimney back on. We are ready for the tank section. Already assembled, it goes on easier this way. We are done with the insides. All that is left is to actually fill the tank. Take your Phillips head and unscrew the bottom fill screw. Take your bottle and place it firmly into the fill hole. It is very important to note that when you fill it, you will want to fill it just above where you can see inside of the window. You do want a little bit of air to be inside the tank, otherwise it may not feed correctly. The Kayfun holds a surprising amount of liquid. Whenever you've finished, make sure you replace the fill screw, tighten it in firmly. You are almost ready to vape. Replace the atomizer onto the device. We are going to prime it. This is done by placing your finger over the air hole and taking a few inhales while covering and uncovering the hole. You may see some bubbles come up from the side, and that's what you want to look for, assuming you are using the clear tank section. At that point, you should be able to vape the device until the tank is empty.